Tonight on Reporting Scotland, the niece of a North Lanarkshire nurse whose death is thought to be the first in the UK linked to a weight loss jag calls for greater awareness of the risks.
She went to A&E just a couple of days after the stomach pain started. It was 2 days later after she was in A&E, she basically went into a coma and didn't wake up from it. And as she was in the coma, every organ started to fail.
Also in tonight's programme, 30 years after her death, a new appeal and a £20,000 reward in the hunt for the killer of Shona Stevens. The 31-year-old was attacked near her home in Irvine in November 1994. Her family says not a day goes by that she's not in their thoughts. 3 people, including a 13-year-old boy, are charged in Edinburgh after violent unrest on Bonfire night.
And coming up in tonight's sport, as Scotland prepare to play Rugby World Champions South Africa, we hear from both camps about the Murrayfield clash.
Hello, I'm Sally Magnuson. Welcome to Friday's programme. Susan McGowan was 58 when she decided to try new weight loss injections. She got a prescription for a legally available drug, Mounjaro, from an online pharmacy, but within 2 weeks she died. The drug was listed on her death certificate. Now her family want greater awareness of possible side effects. Medical experts say legal weight loss injections are subject to rigorous safety testing. Katrina McPhee has the story. I see you.
Susan was such a bubbly person. She was really generous, she was really kind, and she was the life of the party. She was everyone's Auntie Susie. I think Susan always held a wee bit of extra weight, and she just wanted to do something a bit different this time to try and lose weight maybe a bit quicker. There was never any health concerns. She wasn't on any other medication.
With a holiday coming up, Susan visited an online pharmacy and was prescribed tirzepatide under the brand name Mounjaro. Initially, she experienced minor side effects, but after 2 weeks on the lowest dose, she became very ill.
So when she had the severe sickness and she went to A&E just a couple of days after the stomach pain started, it was 2 days later after she was in A&E, she basically went into a coma and didn't wake up from it. And as she was in the coma, every organ started to fail.
Susan died in early September at the age of 58. Her death certificate lists the cause of death as multiple organ failure, septic shock, pancreatitis and use of prescribed tirzepatide. The drug was approved for use as a weight loss aid in the UK in 2023 by the medicine regulator, the MHRA.
MHRA runs the Yellow Card Scheme,
It runs the Yellow Card Scheme, where any member of the public or health profession can log reports of suspected side effects. Between January and May this year, there have been 208 reports about tirzepatide, including 31 classed as serious and 1 suspected death of a man in his 60s. A spokesperson for Lilly, which produces Mounjaro in the UK, said,
"Patient safety is Lilly's top priority. Mounjaro was approved based on extensive assessment of the benefits and risks of the medicine."
A spokesperson for the MHRA said,
"Our sincere sympathies are with the family of the individual concerned. No medicine would be approved unless it met our expected standards of safety, quality and effectiveness."
Tirzepatide is one of a group of weight loss drugs known as GLP-1 receptors, which work by making the patient feel fuller for longer. These drugs have passed all the clinical trials needed to be approved for use in the UK and have been cautiously welcomed by those working to tackle obesity.
On the basis of single cases, it's difficult to establish cause and effect. It really is. But in the vast majority of the major outcomes, very common outcomes, trials are very robust in trying to establish safety, that the drugs generally have substantial benefits that outweigh the risks.
Tirzepatide became the subject of national debate recently when the Health Secretary announced plans to roll it out to unemployed people to help them back into work.
I think anything that's backed by the government you would trust. I would urge them to reconsider and do more research because I don't think there's been enough studies being completed at this point.
BBC News asked the Department of Health and Social Care if it would review its decision in the wake of Susan's death. The department declined to comment. What would you say to anyone thinking about taking these jabs?
I would ask you and plead you to speak to your GP about things like this first. There might be another option. I thought a lot about doing this interview because it wasn't fair to Susan to share this information. However, I do feel in my heart that she wouldn't want the same people facing what she did.
That report from Fiona McPhee. 30 years ago, Shona Stevens was attacked as she walked home from a shop in Irvine in North Ayrshire. The mother of one died from her injuries in hospital a few days later, and decades on, her murder remains unsolved. Police say they're now following new lines of inquiry, and a £20,000 reward for information that leads to bringing her killer to justice is also being offered. Aileen Clark reports.
Shona Stevens was 31, mum to daughter Candice. She was a student and they lived with Shona's mum in Irvine. On the 10th of November 1994, as this reconstruction shows, Shona walked along to the local shop. She didn't make it back home.
She was on foot within the park, a short distance from her home, 200 yards, 2 minutes walk away, where she was subject to an extremely violent attack.
And that's perhaps one of the most shocking things about this case, is that this attack happened at lunchtime one day.
Absolutely, and that is why this was an attack that took place in broad daylight. This is why I'm appealing to those who would have been in and around the park on the day in question to come forward and speak to the police. Irrespective of whether you have spoken to the police in 1994, we want to speak with you again to go over in the most granular detail your account, your observations, because within that there may well be the key to solving this inquiry.
In the weeks that followed, her distraught mother and aunt appealed to the public for help to catch her killer.
My daughter Shona was a quiet, reserved girl who minded her own business.
It's been very difficult because the house is empty without Shona, and the wee Candice is missing her mum. She's only 7 and she's missing her mum, and it's very difficult.
Are you further down the road of catching Shona Stevens' killer today than you were 30 years ago?
I believe that myself and the inquiry team are pursuing lines of inquiry that have the potential to generate a positive outcome for this investigation.
Photos like this one with her mum will be so precious to Shona's daughter Candice, who was just 7 years old when her mum was murdered. Shona's mum is still grieving in her 90s.
It's plain to see that they've been ripped apart by what's happened to them. They've lost a loving mother, they've lost a loving daughter, and 30 years on they're still searching for answers. And from a personal perspective, you take that responsibility on and you do whatever you can to try and investigate it, to try and get answers where there previously haven't been answers.
Aileen Clark, reporting Scotland.
Police have made 3 more arrests in connection with disorder in Edinburgh on Bonfire night. One of those charged is a 13-year-old boy. At least 19 others have been arrested across the country following the scenes earlier in the week. Here's Stephen Godden.
Wholly unacceptable was how police described the Bonfire night disorder that saw officers pelted with bricks, bottles and fireworks. These images were captured by the Force helicopter, part of a response that the authorities insist will bring consequences for those involved. Among 3 people charged today was a 13-year-old boy. The teenager was arrested in connection with vandalism at a car dealership on Calder Road that saw more than 20 cars damaged at a cost of more than £20,000. He'll appear in court next month. So too will a 38-year-old man charged after fireworks were set off in the stairwell of nearby flats. The trouble in Edinburgh flared in a number of areas, including Niddrie, where an officer had been injured on Halloween when a brick was thrown through the window of her police van. On the south side, Gracemount also saw a large-scale police response. A 40-year-old today charged after a car was seen stopping among a group of young people and providing fireworks that police allege were used in the disorder that followed.
Although not as serious as last year, police say that Bonfire night disorder in the capital has once again left people in a state of alarm. They've asked the public to help them identify those involved and insist that today's arrests won't be the last. Stephen Godden, reporting Scotland, Edinburgh.
A controversial ban on wood-burning stoves in new homes or conversions has been permanently ditched by the Scottish Government. It comes months after the regulations were paused, amid concern that they would have a disproportionate impact on those living in rural areas. Our news correspondent Jamie McIver reports.
The Ferguson family on Skye burn wood to keep their home warm. It's cosy but creates carbon dioxide, a key driver of global warming. In rural areas, some argue wood-burning stoves are vital.
It's a way of heating the house, especially when we lose electricity. With the amount of storms we're having these days, we're almost guaranteed every time to lose power for a wee while, in which case we don't have a way to heat up our food or to heat the house. The gas boiler obviously needs electricity, so it's a guarantee that we're going to have at least one room warm and a way to make a cup of tea.
We decided to put in the wood burning stove just to give us that additional heat.
And it's because of concern in rural Scotland that a ban on wood-burning stoves in new buildings has now been abandoned, barely 6 months after it was brought in.
The Scottish Government is serious about tackling climate change. What we're looking at today is a sustainable form of heating for many people, and that's why the change has been examined and the change has been made. It doesn't alter the fact that Scotland needs to change the way that we heat our houses.
So just what will and won't be allowed in new buildings? Wood-burning stoves are allowed, but a ban remains on new primary heating systems fuelled by oil and gas. The ban on new wood-burning stoves came in while the Greens were working in partnership with the SNP. The Greens say they're still worried about the risk of wood burning in towns and cities.
The concern here will be urban areas where we're seeing increasing numbers of people installing wood-burning stoves, and that is causing a pollution problem, a public health problem, but mostly in urban areas. So the government really needs to think about regulating that if they're going to allow wood-burning stoves to be installed in new build housing.
Health campaigners also have concerns. They say particles from wood burning can affect people with conditions like asthma.
Any emission is not only bad for the environment, it's bad for human health. And we are trying to make sure that the Scottish Government is being tougher on emissions at all levels from all sources to make sure that we have the cleanest air possible and that we're guaranteeing everyone a right to breathe clean air.
Today's decision will be welcomed by some in rural areas, but disappoint those who say tackling climate change and reducing harmful emissions matters more than anything else. Jamie McIver, reporting Scotland.
The union that targeted the First Minister's constituency with 2 weeks of school strikes over a pay dispute has backed down. Unison held the action in Perth and Kinross last month with the threat of taking national strike action, but it's now accepting the offer and says it's secured further talks on future deals with the local government body COSLA. Our political correspondent David Wallace-Lockhart is here. Remind us, first of all, what these strikes were about.
So John Swinney tends to be our First Minister who largely keeps his cool, but it was obvious these strikes were a source of frustration for him. He felt it was unfair his constituents were being targeted because he was the First Minister. So let's remember what this was all about. Unison, the union, they represent, amongst others, janitors, classroom assistants, were unsatisfied with a pay offer they were getting for this year. It was 3.6% or around £1,300. It was accepted by other unions, but Unison were pushing for an improved offer. The message coming from COSLA, that's the body that represents councils in Scotland and is directly responsible for these sort of talks, and the message coming from the Scottish Government was the same: there's no more money.
What's behind the calling off of the action now then?
So there's no new money for Unison workers, but what there is the promise of future talks with COSLA on pay, on the length of the working week, on general council funding. And Unison now say that once this is thrown into the mix, that represents a credible offer that they can now recommend that their members go for. Unison do seem to have settled for less than they intimated at the beginning of all of this, but I suppose they may think that they've shown the Scottish Government, shown COSLA that they're willing to take industrial action if they're unhappy with future pay offers. From the Scottish Government's point of view, they've welcomed the fact that these strikes look like they're now coming to an end, and I suspect John Swinney will be personally very happy about that.
Thanks very much, David Wallace-Lockhart. The celebrity hairdresser Trevor Sorby has died of cancer at the age of 75. The stylist, who was born in Paisley, became famous for creating the wedge in the 1970s, as well as for cutting the hair of the rich and famous, including Grace Jones and the Beach Boys. Trevor Sorby's hair care and salon company said he died peacefully with his family and beloved dog by his side. Under Armour is one of the biggest sports brands in the world, with lucrative sponsorship deals for elite athletes across the globe. Now it's settled a multi-million-pound legal dispute with a Scottish pension fund. The fund had invested in the company's stock before accusing it of making false statements about its products, something Under Armour denies. Ben Phillip has more.
This long-running legal case has a hint of David versus Goliath, a Scottish pension fund taking on one of the biggest brands in the world. The North East Scotland Pension Fund administers a scheme for 78,000 workers from Aberdeen City, Aberdeenshire and Moray councils. The fund lost £6 million after investing in Under Armour stock. It then led a class action lawsuit in the United States against Under Armour on behalf of a group of investors who had suffered similar financial losses. It accused the American company of misrepresenting its financial condition, and after years of legal wrangling, a judge in the US has ruled a settlement should be paid of £334 million to affected investors. The law firm handling the case in the US describes the settlement as an important win for investors.
So to get what is one of the top 50 outcomes ever in this sort of case in the USA, while the market cap of the company was hovering at around $3 billion, we're very pleased.
Under Armour denies the accusations and says entering into this agreement is not an admission or finding of fault or wrongdoing. The North East Scotland Pension Fund previously said that workers' pensions would remain unaffected and funds will now be distributed to all those affected in the lawsuit. Ben Phillip, reporting Scotland, Aberdeen.
Some children were incapable of playing when they returned to nursery after the first lockdown in 2020. That's according to one childcare manager who gave evidence to the Scottish COVID inquiry. Other witnesses spoke about the struggles of parents, pupils and teachers when the education system shut down. Andrew Picken has been following the hearings.
Nursery children in Glasgow, learning through play. It's essential to develop basic skills in communicating, counting and cooperation.
They're all called pomegranates.
But when Scotland locked down in 2020, these kinds of opportunities were taken away.
What could we see at night?
This week the inquiry began by hearing about the effects of the pandemic on the youngest children.
You would see children covering up their dollies or their teddy bears' mouths with sellotape to replicate the masks.
Experts felt protecting play was not enough of a priority during lockdown, and the impact was evident.
So I think there was a lack of smart thinking about where children could go and play, and it's spaces that we should have brought into use straight away.
We experienced huge amounts of children coming in after the first lockdown who were incapable of playing. Couldn't do it unless you gave them a phone or an iPad.
The inquiry also heard about the impact of schools closing on older children. There was evidence too about the struggles of parents and their children.
We had comments from families saying they felt abandoned. We had one parent with a son with autism who would not get out of bed.
Adding up the costs of the pandemic in all areas of education is the aim of this part of the inquiry.
Great job, you did it.
Children are not going to be heard directly in the hearings, but their voices are very much part of the inquiry. Andrew Picken, reporting Scotland.
Sheila's here tonight with the sport, and it's rugby you're starting with.
It is rugby, yeah. Big win last weekend, but slightly trickier opposition this weekend. Hello there. Glasgow Warriors fullback Tom Jordan will make his first Scotland start against South Africa at Murrayfield on Sunday. Star duo Finn Russell and Blair Kinghorn return, along with scrum half Ben White, having all been unavailable for last weekend's 57-17 win over Fiji. So can Scotland get a result against the Springboks for the first time in 14 years? Here's our sports news correspondent, Chris McLaughlin.
The Springboks were given the full Scottish welcome at training this week, clear favourites, and it's little wonder. The last time the sides faced up, there was no real contest. This was the World Cup in France last year. It was a comfortable 18-13 for the eventual tournament winners.
Scotland think they're going to win on Sunday, and we know if we're a little bit off our game, we're in for a very, very tough, long day. I just think the bagpipes and the anthem, sometimes you catch yourself singing with.
The Springboks are sporting royalty at home. These the scenes after their most recent World Cup triumph. A squad with the ultimate faith in their head coach.
I think we can expect a couple more surprises from Rassie. I mean, we all know Rassie. He's a mad genius. But I do think it's going to be maybe a little bit of a different game to what we're used to. Maybe not as physical. Obviously, it will be physical, but it's going to go wide, I think.
It was months going. Oh, it's been given away. What on earth are Fiji doing?
That might suit Scotland, whose tails are up after a 57-17 win over Fiji last weekend. But are they a more confident side since the last time they met the world champions?
The fact that we have played them, the players have felt what it's like to go up against the Springboks from whatever area of the game is relevant to them. It could be how they defend, line out, the contact area. So they know now or they've got recent experience of how it is to go up against the Springbok team.
10 seconds remaining. That's Scotland. It's all over.
The last time Scotland beat the Springboks was back in 2010. It's been a while. The world champions await once more on Sunday. Chris McLaughlin, BBC News.
Football now, and Aberdeen manager Jimmy Tilleen has urged his side not to linger on their League Cup thrashing last weekend as they look to continue their unbeaten Premiership start against Dundee on Saturday. The Dons boss, who was named as the league's manager of the month for October, said they'll take their learnings from the loss but insists they must move on quickly if they want to pick up all 3 points.
I don't think it's going to have an impact on the game on Saturday. So for us, it's more about the long term, and we know we have still things to learn. We need to improve parts, and for us, it's not going to be any changes. Our preparation for this game is still the same. We prepare the players. They have been good spirit on the sessions this week, a lot of energy, and everybody looking forward for the game tomorrow.
Now, they had mixed results in Europe last night, but both Hearts and Rangers bosses were pleased with their sides' performances as they prepare to go up against each other this weekend.
This is football, and I want to see that mentality every time. It's very important in the way I want to see a dressing room, in the way I want to see a team on the pitch. And the last couple of months, they had a few bangs on their heads that we could use as a lesson to get this mentality.
And a wee bit of football news just in. Dundee United boss Jim Goodwin has signed a new deal at the club.
Great. OK, thank you very much indeed, Sheila. On the 7 on BBC Scotland, they're going to be hearing from the Scottish Conservative MSP Sandesh Gohani, who helped to save a man who fell ill at the Scottish Parliament.
Somebody came in to Parliament and unfortunately just before he entered the building he collapsed. When I arrived he didn't have a pulse, he wasn't breathing, and so we needed to commence CPR and start resuscitating him.
And you can hear more from Dr. Gohani on the 7 in just a few minutes' time. In the meantime, let's go straight to Christopher for the weather. And there's Fort William. Oh, it's lovely blue sky there.
Yeah, it's not often you get to see Ben Nevis cloudless there. Yeah. Blue skies. For most, though, it was grey, wasn't it, Sally? Thanks very much indeed. Very good evening to you once again. Much of the Highlands bathed in lovely sunshine and blue sky. For most of us, it was quite grey, wasn't it? This is a picture from Stirling. So dark, the street lights are on early afternoon. As we head into this evening, the clouds still with us across parts of central, southern and eastern Scotland. Clear skies in the northwest, though, and that's where we'll see temperatures down close to freezing with some mist and fog patches forming. But for all, it's cool, if not cold, compared with recent nights. To tomorrow, high pressure just about holding on, affording us another largely dry day. For many, once again, it will be cloudy, but for some, brighter than today. So here's a snapshot first thing in the morning. You can see we've still got some brightness in the northwest, some mist and fog, though that could be quite dense and really slow to lift, really stubborn. As we head through towards the afternoon, much of the west of the country should see something a little bit brighter than today, but central and eastern parts still cloudy. South Lanarkshire, the Borders, the Lothians, Edinburgh, Clackmannanshire, Fife, Angus, Perthshire, Aberdeenshire, cloudy, cool, some patchy rain or drizzle. To the west, some lovely sunshine. Once again, a brighter day across the Western Isles as well, and the wind's lighter too. So for those hill walking or climbing, certainly across the northwest, that's where we'll see the best of any bright weather on offer. Winds are largely light. Temperatures there at the summits, quite chilly across the southern uplands actually. And across the eastern ranges, the cloud will be thicker and there'll be spots of drizzle coming out of that cloud at times too, with some hill fog in places. And certainly across the northwest, there could well be some fog in the glens first thing as well. Tomorrow evening, some clear spells, but then patchy rain beginning to work in, the precursor to some weather fronts arriving on Sunday. So a bit of a different day of weather on Sunday. That high pressure nowhere to be seen actually. A lot of cloud around and some patchy light rain moving west to east. Of course, Sunday is Remembrance Sunday and plenty of services at 11 a.m. up and down the country. Lots of cloud around, a bit damp underfoot with some patchy but largely light rain moving east through the day. That wet weather will turn heavy later on across the Northern Isles. And you can see behind that cloud and rain brightening up across Skye and the Western Isles, and those brighter conditions will chase that cloud and rain eastwards through the day. There's that heavier rain in the Northern Isles. The east of the country, though, likely to hold on to the cloud through daylight hours. And next week, that high pressure is returning, but this time in a slightly different position, so it's a northwest wind, and that means temperatures closer to average. That's the forecast for now.
Thanks very much indeed, Chris. Now tonight's main news again. The death of a nurse in North Lanarkshire has been linked to a weight loss drug. We'll have the late news here for you at around 10:30 tonight as usual, but until then, from everyone in the team, do enjoy your evening. Bye-bye.